It was late, somewhere between dishes drying on the rack and the air outside cooling just enough to make the kitchen window fog over. I leaned against the counter, still in my work scrubs, that smell of microwaved leftovers lingering in the air. My mother stood at the sink, not washing, not drying, just standing, arms crossed, eyes full of conclusions she never bothered to explain. "I want to own my own house before I turn 30, I said. It wasn't a dramatic declaration, just words, quiet and factual, like stating I needed milk or that the light bulb in the hallway had gone out again. Vera didn't even turn around, just chuckled, the kind of laugh you use when you think someone's naive, but you don't want to outright insult them, except she did anyway. "Dream on, girl. You're no Ziva." I felt it, that sharp pinch right behind my ribs where old hopes go to die. I didn't argue, didn't flinch, just breathed slow and deep like I'd taught myself. My sister's name always entered the room before she did, like perfume. Ziva, the pianist. Ziva, the one who made Vera beam in public and whisper about scholarships to church ladies. And me? I was background noise. Steady, quiet, forgettable. But I nodded. Just once. "All right," I whispered to myself later that night, under the hum of the hallway heater. "Dream on. Watch me." I wasn't always this restrained. When I was 10, I begged her to let me take piano lessons like Ziva. It was one of the few times I remember pleading. She was sitting on the couch, folding laundry, the television playing reruns of a show she never paid attention to. I stood there, rehearsed sentence on loop, fingers clutching the edge of the coffee table. "Can I learn piano too? I want to play like Ziva." She didn't even look up. "That's for talented kids," she said, her tone dry, as if she were stating the weather. "You need to focus on school." "You're good at that." Ziva, polishing her trophy just a few feet away, glanced over but said nothing. Her silence weighed more than the gleam of the award in her hands. That was the first time I understood some cages don't need locks. They're made of words. Ones that sound harmless if you repeat them out loud, but leave scars where no one can see. Fast forward. 20 years old, standing on a city bus platform with my coffee in a cracked travel mug and 2 part-time job IDs clipped to my coat pocket. Nothing much had changed. Still public transport, still someone else's second-hand winter coat, still invisible. I remember watching the condensation on the bus window, how it blurred the world outside. I stared at my own reflection until it disappeared into fog. If I'm going to be invisible, I thought, then I'm going to be unstoppable. Most days, I kept that promise. At home, the hallway told a story I wasn't in. Photo frames lined the walls. Ziva's recitals, Ziva's graduation, Ziva in a crisp white dress next to Vera, both smiling like a magazine ad. My photos? There were a couple. School IDs mostly, or blurry pictures from church picnics. I once asked, years ago, why my college diploma wasn't framed like Ziva's. "We ran out of frames," Vera said without missing a beat. I stopped asking for space I was never invited to take. It didn't bother me, not in the way it used to, but that kind of repeated omission eats at something soft in you. Not your pride. That gets calloused fast. It's your right to exist equally. That's what starts to feel negotiable. Ziva came home for a visit a few months ago, in that perfect timing of hers, just in time for dinner, with big news and bigger plans. She dropped into the dining room like a bride-to-be commercial, waving her hand mid-air. "We're looking at a place in Lake Oswego," she announced, practically glowing. "He wants something close to the water. Can you imagine?" Vera clasped her hands like she was praying. "Oh, baby, that's wonderful. I always knew you'd land on your feet." Then came the one-liner that tasted more like judgment than celebration. "See? It's all about having a real plan." I said nothing. I never do at that table. But when I got back to my room that night, tiny, window facing a brick wall, mattress still on the floor, I opened my laptop and typed into Google, "How to buy your first home under 30 with bad credit." The search bar blinked at me, patient and waiting, unlike most people in my life. I reached for my notebook, that little black one I'd started using after graduation. Its pages were filled with numbers, grocery lists, passwords, quotes I copied from library books. On a clean page, I wrote, "Buy my house." 3 words. A vow, not a wish. I folded my transit pass and placed it next to the notebook like it was a piece of evidence. My eyes moved toward the window, a rectangle of black night and the distant echo of bus brakes pulling to a stop down the street. Dream on, huh? The words tasted different now, not bitter, not naive, just right. A smirk tugged at the corner of my mouth. She didn't know it yet, but the journey would demand more than double shifts. The morning air bit harder than usual. I exhaled, watching the puff of breath vanish just like I had so many times in conversations at home. The bus was late again. My toes curled inside boots that had lost their insulation a winter ago, and I shifted from foot to foot, hoping the motion would chase away the numbness creeping up my calves. Then I heard it, the sharp purr of tires turning the corner. A silver sedan slowed just enough at the intersection for me to see Ziva behind the wheel, her perfect hair glinting in the weak sunlight. She didn't stop, didn't wave, just gave a quick honk, 2 polite beeps like I was a stranger crossing the street. Then she was gone. Just like that. Vera's voice echoed in my mind, as if it had been waiting. Ziva's making us proud, finally using her gifts. And what was I using? My exhaustion. I pulled my jacket tighter, stepped into the bus that had finally arrived, and took the usual seat, 3rd row, window side, left corner. That was the seat I'd claimed through sheer consistency. That was the only thing I'd ever been allowed to claim. By the time I made it through my first shift and grabbed a lukewarm sandwich from the staff fridge, my feet already throbbed. Still, I worked the evening shift too, and as I stocked shelves and updated inventory logs, I found my mind drifting back to a memory I'd shelved years ago. I was 19, and the day of my best friend Madison's graduation had finally arrived. She had invited me weeks in advance, even bought me a dress with her employee discount. But I didn't go. Instead, I was behind the counter of a hardware store on 82nd Avenue, ringing up hammers and bulk screws while the rest of my friends posed with balloons and diplomas. I hadn't had a choice. My shift had been doubled, and rent was due. That night, when I came home sore and silent, Vera didn't ask about the ceremony. She glanced up from folding laundry and asked, "You have the rent, right?" "Yeah," I said, not even looking at her. I chose not to go, not a big deal. Lying like that became second nature. When people leave you out long enough, you start building the narrative for them, so it doesn't hurt when they never ask. At dinner that week, we gathered at Vera's again. Ziva had made her usual grand entrance, dropping hints about real estate this time. "He's thinking of buying in Lake Oswego," she said, spearing a green bean with effortless grace. "We want something upscale but manageable, close to the water." Vera practically clapped. "Isn't she amazing? I always knew she'd go far." I sipped my water slowly. I hadn't even opened my mouth yet. Ziva glanced at me briefly. "What about you, Alethea? Still renting?" I smiled. "For now." "And the down payment?" I asked casually, just to understand, just to hear it said out loud. Ziva shrugged. "Mom and Dad are helping us." "Like they should." Vera didn't flinch. "If you ever settle down, maybe we'll help you too." Settle down. I'd settled plenty. Settled into shifts no one else wanted. Into bills no one else shared. Into silence no one acknowledged. After dinner, I walked back to my side of town. Took the 72, then the 19, then walked the last 3 blocks. I passed cracked sidewalks, dim porch lights, and a convenience store where the owner always nodded but never smiled. Inside my room, I flipped open my budgeting spreadsheet. Rent, groceries, gas, transit card reload, cell phone bill. Every dollar had a destination, every cent had a story, and none of it came with a bow or a "we're proud of you." I wasn't angry, not in the fiery smash-a-plate way, but I felt it, slow and building, a quiet storm with nowhere left to go. I didn't want a handout. I wanted acknowledgement, not pity, not praise. Just the truth. I was carrying more than anyone ever asked to see. Later that night, I lay in bed scrolling through social media. There it was, Ziva's newest post. #blessed, #future homeowner, #family first, the caption read, paired with a photo of her wrapped in Vera's arms like a daughter fresh from battle, victorious and pure. My thumb hovered over the heart icon, but I didn't tap it. I let the screen fade to black, the reflection of my face staring back at me in that tiny void. I opened my notes app instead, typed slowly. I will not be the family's invisible backbone. I will be the house they never built. That night, I started looking at neighborhoods where my dollar could actually matter. There are certain betrayals that don't come with yelling or slammed doors. They're quiet, tucked between laundry baskets and the scent of microwave lasagna heating in a too-small kitchen. I learned this the summer I turned 17, living in the basement room of my mother's house, where the light bulb above my bed flickered every third night and no one ever fixed it. I had a shoebox. Not the fancy kind, just something left over from an old pair of Ziva's heels. It had duct tape on the edges and a rip along the side, but it was mine. I'd tucked it behind my books, hidden just enough that I thought it was safe. Every shift at the diner down the street, I collected tips, wet bills, quarters sticky from soda, crumpled dollar bills smoothed out on my jeans before slipping into my apron. I didn't spend them, not on movies, not on snacks. I was saving. I wanted to buy a secondhand laptop, nothing fancy. Just something that worked, something that was mine, where no one else knew the passwords. I counted every dollar before I added it to the box. And then, one evening, after a particularly long Sunday shift, I went to add my latest crumpled bills, and something felt off. It was lighter. I felt it the moment I lifted the lid. I counted twice. Then a third time, $180 was gone. I tore apart the bookshelf, thinking maybe the bills had slipped between pages. Maybe I'd miscounted. Maybe. But then I found the box placed slightly differently than I'd left it. I hadn't noticed at first, just a subtle turn, like someone had opened it and didn't care enough to hide it well. I walked upstairs, the box clutched tight against my chest. Vera was in the living room, folding towels while some game show played on mute behind her. "Did you take money from my shoebox?" I asked, voice even, almost gentle. Not accusing, just needing the truth to have a name. She didn't look up. Didn't pause her folding. "It's not stealing," she said flatly. "It's contributing. You live here, don't you?" I just stood there, staring at her hands smoothing out fabric that wasn't clean enough to justify the work she was pretending to do. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't fight. Instead, I wrote it down in my notebook. Don't hide money in places they know. Nothing is hidden when they believe everything is theirs. When you grow up in someone else's house, your walls aren't yours. Neither is your drawer, nor your box. You learn to exist between other people's expectations, always adjusting your edges to avoid being called ungrateful. Sometimes I wonder what else they took that I didn't notice. How many plans were pulled apart before they fully formed? How many of my wants were filtered through someone else's need? Years later, in the silence of my own one-bedroom apartment, I find comfort in bank statements. I double-check every charge. I categorize every expense. Oh, there's no shoebox here, no hidden corners, just numbers and clean lines, protected passwords, and a door that only I have the key to. I don't use cash anymore. It's not just a habit, it's a defense. Cash disappears. Cash doesn't leave a record. Cash is how you learn that trust is a luxury you can't afford. The walls in this apartment are bare. No photos, no canvas prints with hopeful quotes. But they're mine. Every inch, paid for in hours and silence. That fall, Vera invited the family over for her birthday. I went because I knew if I didn't, someone would say I was being cold. Ziva arrived first, hair perfect, perfume expensive. She handed Vera a spa gift card in a gold envelope. Others gave wine, candles, things that made noise and smelled like effort. I had brought a wooden photo frame. I'd carved it myself during a night class at the community center. It wasn't perfect, but it held time and effort and something quiet that I thought might be worth something. Vera glanced at it, then set it on the counter. "Leave it there. I'll open it later," she said, already turning to the next gift. She never did. At the end of the night, the gift bag was still there, untouched, next to the recycling bin. No one mentioned it. No one asked. You don't open gifts you don't think are worth anything, I thought, standing in the kitchen doorway while everyone laughed about something Ziva's fiancé had said. On the ride home, I stared out the bus window, the city passing in smudges of yellow and gray. I didn't feel angry, just confirmed. Back in my apartment, I poured myself a glass of water, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my budgeting app. I scrolled to the category labeled Gifts to Others. I changed the number. 0. It wasn't spite. It was clarity. Giving from the heart doesn't mean handing it to the ungrateful. That was the last time I gave them anything that cost me peace. The house smelled like citrus cleaner and day-old coffee. Sunday afternoons had a pattern to them in Vera's world. Clean floors, loud laughter, and Ziva's accomplishments put on full display. I stood near the doorway of the living room, my coat still slung over my arm, watching Vera rearrange the family accomplishment wall like it was a sacred altar. Ziva, glowing as always, handed over a glossy headshot from her most recent recital, beaming like a pageant queen. Vera held it like it was a holy relic, then stepped up onto the small footstool to find it a perfect spot. And that's when I saw it. My photo, a faded graduation picture, quietly pulled down without a word. No ceremony, no discussion, just removed, folded, and set aside on the console like it had been accidentally included. No one looked at me. No one paused. I wasn't even worth keeping as a placeholder, I thought. Ziva must have noticed the shift in my expression because she turned to me, a faint line between her brows. "Wasn't there a picture of you here?" I smiled tightly, not moving. Guess they needed space for real achievements. Vera didn't miss a beat, her tone breezy as she smoothed the frame into place. "Sweetheart, you're so quiet all the time. People just forget. You're our rock." Funny how they call you a rock while building a monument on your back. The conversation shifted like a breeze through an open window. Ziva's new solo, Vera's plans for redecorating the kitchen. I stood there for a few minutes longer before excusing myself to the kitchen for a glass of water I didn't need. Back at work the next day, I was in the break room, waiting for my lunch to finish heating. The microwave buzzed while I leaned against the wall, staring at the row of lockers. Each one had magnets, photos, notes from kids, inside jokes scribbled in marker. Mine was blank. Not because I didn't have things to add, but because I'd never bothered. I erased myself before anyone else could, kept quiet before someone else told me to, made myself small so no one could say I took up too much room. I didn't touch my sandwich that day. That evening, I returned home late and sat at the dining table, the hum of the fridge and traffic outside the only soundtrack. Vera's voice drifted down the hallway. She was on the phone with someone, probably a neighbor, her voice just loud enough to carry, "Alethea? Oh, she's our quiet one. Always independent, never asks for help." That one stuck, not because it was a lie, but because it was true, and that's what made it hurt. My silence had been used like a credit line they kept maxing out. They wore it like a badge. Look at what we raised, a daughter who doesn't ask, doesn't burden, doesn't complain. "They've weaponized my silence," I wrote later that night in my journal. Turned my coping mechanism into my brand. I stared at the words for a long time, then underlined them. No more ghost roll. Something in me clicked. Soft, not loud, but real. Around midnight, when I was sure everyone was asleep, I opened the drawer of my nightstand and pulled out a tiny square photo I'd printed at a vending booth in the corner of the grocery store a week earlier. It was just me. No pose, no smile, just real. I crept back into the living room. The wall looked just like it had earlier. Ziva's headshots front and center, the others lined like supporting actors in a play I hadn't been cast in. I turned the frame of one of Ziva's old pictures ever so slightly, just enough to hide the tape I stuck behind it. My photo. My proof. Not where anyone would see it. But I'd know it was there. I used to think being invisible meant being safe, until I realized even shadows get stepped on. Dinner at Vera's was never just dinner. It was ceremony, wrapped in passive aggression, a ritual where the cutlery clicked a little louder when someone didn't toe the line, where conversation was more performance than connection. That Sunday night was no different. Spring had just broken through the Portland gray, but the warmth hadn't touched our table. Vera passed around a casserole dish like it was gospel, recounting how her friend's daughter just got engaged to a dentist from Bend. "She's only 28, Vera said, tilting her glass toward me like it was an indictment. "Not wasting time, that one. Smart girl." I didn't bite. She turned to me, her voice dropping into that polished edge I'd heard too often. Maybe you should focus on finding someone. You're not getting younger, sweetheart. I took a slow sip of water, then met her gaze. Calm, measured. I'm not waiting for a husband to validate me. I'm busy building a life I won't want to escape from. The silence that followed wasn't quiet, it throbbed. Ziva adjusted her bracelet and avoided eye contact. Vera let out a soft scoff and returned to cutting her steak, the knife slicing through meat with a little too much force. It wasn't the first time she'd tried to reframe my independence as a flaw, but it was the first time I'd refused to let it slide without resistance. That single sentence sat between us on the table like a third course. 3 years ago, over lunch at a diner off Foster Road, she'd done the same thing, different packaging. We were seated in a booth that smelled faintly of burnt toast. I was mid-bite when I mentioned a job opening at my company. A promotion. A leadership role. She waved her hand like she was brushing away crumbs. Too much ambition makes women look desperate, men like soft, not strong. I smiled then, the way women are taught to smile when someone belittles them under the guise of care. But I made the call the next day and submitted my application. I got the position. She never asked if I'd applied. That memory resurfaced as I walked home after dinner, boots crunching over the gravel near the bus stop. My chest felt tight, but not from regret. It was the sensation of finally naming a truth out loud and realizing no one died from hearing it. I replayed my words in my head. Building a life I won't want to escape from. That was it. That was the line in the sand I'd been too cautious to draw until now. You don't owe grace to the ones who mocked your grind. That's what I wrote in my journal that night, pen pressing harder than usual against the paper. From this point on, no more polite nods, no more, maybe you're right. I flipped to a fresh page and began sketching a vision board. Crude drawings of a house, a ring of keys, a small garden. Freedom, not painted in romance or permission, but in earned autonomy. A home, not because I was someone's wife, but because I'd learned how to back myself. It was well past midnight when I finally crawled into bed, but my mind was still working. The next morning, I stepped into work early, hoping for silence before the phones began ringing. Elowen, my department manager, passed me by on the way to the break room. She stopped, studied me for a moment, then smiled. You look lighter today. I returned the smile, didn't say a word. Inside my bag, folded carefully between a lunch container and a grocery receipt, was my printed house savings tracker. 2 new rows had been filled over the weekend. That week, I opened a bank account my mother didn't know existed. The envelope was thinner than I expected. Mortgage decisions, you'd think, came with weight. But this one felt light in my hands, like it already knew what it contained wasn't going to land gently. I opened it at the kitchen counter, standing in the same spot where I used to balance a chipped plate of reheated noodles and a bottle of grocery store wine. Dear Ms. Collins, it began. Always a bad sign when they lead with formality. The words spilled forward like a cold wave, loan denied due to poor credit history. I blinked, read it again. That had to be wrong. I sat down at my laptop and logged into my credit report account. My palms were already sweating, my chest a slow tightening drumbeat. And there it was. Several missed payments. An open credit card account I didn't recognize, opened when I was 19. Under my name, used, neglected, still active. My jaw tensed. I tried to think. Where was I at 19? Fresh out of community college, working shifts at the bakery, no time for partying, no need for a credit card because I only bought what I could afford. I'd been proud of that, too proud, apparently, to see the trap already set. I never applied for this card, I whispered, half to myself, half to the room. I never even used it. But someone had. The flashback hit before I could fight it. A scene I hadn't given weight to until now. 5 years ago, I was in the living room folding laundry while Vera sat at the kitchen table surrounded by school forms and old bank statements. She was muttering about FAFSA deadlines and utility bills. She looked up suddenly, pen tapping against a blank field. "What's your social again?" she asked, casual as asking for the salt. I hesitated, barely. But I gave it to her, because she was my mother, because I didn't know better. Because people like me are taught that questioning your parents is disrespectful even when it's the only way to survive. Now I knew better. I called the credit card company first thing the next morning. After being put on hold for nearly 40 minutes, I finally spoke to someone who confirmed the account. Yes, it was opened under my name. Yes, the email attached wasn't mine. No, they couldn't remove it without legal documentation. And no, the charges weren't fraudulent. They'd been used to pay utility bills, cell phone plans, groceries, household expenses. I hung up without yelling. My hands trembled, but my voice hadn't cracked once. That was its own kind of victory. Later that afternoon, I printed every statement and slid them into a new plastic sleeve in my binder. I labeled the section, "Debt I didn't make, but I'll still pay." Because I wouldn't let it be the thing that stopped me. I spent that weekend reading everything I could on rebuilding credit. Forums, financial advice blogs, Reddit threads written by women who'd clawed their way back from worse. I made a list, called a credit union across town, set an appointment, and I opened a new account, one that Vera didn't know existed, a clean slate. Monday morning came with the usual chaos, phones ringing, paperwork piling, small talk I had no patience for. Elowen found me in the break room, pouring lukewarm coffee from the shared pot. "You all right?" she asked, studying me the way only people who've seen the bottom know how to look. "Credit mess," I said, not bothering to sugarcoat. Turns out someone made choices for me when I was too naive to realize it. She nodded slowly, like it was a language she understood. "I had to rebuild mine too," she said. "It's ugly, but doable." "And let me tell you something." She paused, made sure I was looking at her. "You don't owe them a future just because they gave you a past." That night, I went home and pulled the old credit card from the bottom of my sock drawer. It was dusty, slightly bent. I'd never even activated it. I grabbed a pair of kitchen scissors and cut it clean through. Then I placed the shredded pieces into an envelope and wrote, in capital letters across the front, "No longer yours." It didn't feel dramatic. It felt deserved. The next morning, I took a different bus across town, past streets I hadn't driven through in years. I walked into a branch office that still smelled like new carpet and fresh printer toner. "Let's start fresh," I told the banker. And for once, I meant it. Saturday morning had barely begun when the knock landed on my door, sharp, deliberate, not at all the kind that hesitates. I was barefoot, scrubbing down the bathroom sink when I heard it. I didn't need to check the peephole. Only one person in my life announced their presence with the arrogance of someone who believed they never needed an invitation. Vera. She stood there holding a grocery bag like a peace offering. "I brought a few things. Thought I'd stop by," she said, brushing past me before I could say no. I didn't stop her. I just stepped aside and watched her do what she always did, walk into spaces like she owned them. She moved through the apartment slowly, eyes scanning every detail. The thrifted dining chairs I'd sanded down myself, the chipped blue vase with one artificial sunflower, the bookshelf arranged in color gradients. She opened the kitchen cabinets without asking, fingered the edge of my laminate countertops, paused just long enough at the refrigerator to take note of the brand. Then, standing in the middle of my kitchen, she said, "You did this all on your own? No help at all?" It wasn't admiration. It was suspicion wearing the mask of politeness. I smiled gently, tightly. I knew exactly why she came. She didn't want to congratulate me. She wanted to investigate. She placed the grocery bag on the counter and pulled out items one by one, like she was performing a magic trick. Boxed pasta, store-brand oatmeal, a half-dozen eggs in a plastic bag. None of it necessary, all of it symbolic. We sat for coffee because that's what civility demands. She brought up Ziva's engagement party, of course. "Ziva's fiancé is a doctor," she said, swirling her spoon through the sugar like it had offended her. "She won't have to stretch every dollar like you." I took a sip of my coffee before answering. And calm, firm. "I'd rather stretch my own than borrow someone else's." She flinched, barely. It was enough. Still, she leaned forward. "I just wonder how you managed this. I mean, a place like this on your salary?" She gave a tight-lipped smile. Someone must have helped. There it was, not pride, not awe, just a carefully disguised accusation. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I just let the silence fill the room and watched her get uncomfortable in the presence of a woman who didn't owe her an explanation. That night, after she left, I sat on the edge of my bed and remembered another night. 2 years ago, I had been working late, again, closing shift at the warehouse. I was walking to the bus stop when a man stepped out from the alley. I didn't see the fist, only felt the sidewalk meet my shoulder. He took my bag, my phone, my tips, all of it. I woke up in the ER, my cheekbone bruised, my pride shattered. I called Vera, shaking, needing comfort. Needing my mother. Her first words? "Why were you even out that late? You always overdo it." Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "I'm on my way." Just blame, neatly packaged in the voice of someone who's never asked what it costs to survive alone. When the people you call during pain blame you for bleeding, you stop calling. The memory burned now, fresh despite the time. It reminded me why my face hadn't changed when she questioned how I paid for my home. It reminded me why my voice stayed level when hers turned sharp. After Vera's visit, I texted Nadia. "Mom's suspicious. Time to start moving papers." I pulled out the folder I'd been quietly building. New trust. Inside were documents she'd never see, notarized statements, emergency contacts with Vera's name replaced, financial accounts separate from the ones she ever knew existed, legal distance, emotional distance. Line by line, I was building a border no one would cross without permission again. Later that night, I sat on my couch, legs folded beneath me, the overhead light dimmed to a soft yellow. Vera's words kept circling in my mind like a mosquito I couldn't swat. Someone must have helped. I opened my laptop and pulled up my blog draft. Typed the first sentence that had been itching at the back of my throat for hours. They only believe in your hard work if they can take credit for it. That blog post went live the next morning. So did the backlash. I sat at my kitchen table early that morning, the only sound the hum of the fridge and the occasional rustle of paper as I slid invitation cards into envelopes. The stack in front of me was small, deliberate. I wasn't inviting everyone, just the ones who'd claimed to care. One of those envelopes had no warmth attached to it, no personal note, no "Love Alethea," just a printed invitation on cream cardstock that read, "Housewarming, Saturday, 2 p.m. Address, time, date, nothing more." I wrote her name, Vera, not Mom. Before sealing it, I whispered to the paper, "I'm not inviting you to celebrate me. I'm inviting you to witness what you said I couldn't do." I dropped it in the mailbox on my way to work, and with it, the last thread of me hoping she'd say she was proud. By Saturday afternoon, my living room was full. The windows were cracked open to let the spring air move through, and the scent of lemon-scented cleaner still clung to the wood floors. I'd arranged everything myself, borrowed folding chairs, thrifted glassware, a mismatched but charming array of snacks and finger foods. Nothing flashy, but mine. Ziva arrived first, of course, hair perfect, makeup light but precise. She gave me an air kiss, handed me a potted plant she probably didn't pick out, and immediately began taking photos of the layout. Then came Vera and Astria. My mother in a beige jacket she wore to every occasion, my father silent as always. Vera's eyes scanned the room like she was appraising it for resale. "You managed this?" she asked, not a smile in sight. I met her eyes. One bus ride at a time. The guests filtered in. Co-workers, Nadia, a neighbor from upstairs who brought brownies in Tupperware. Everyone mingled with that curious, cautious politeness reserved for semi-formal affairs. But Vera stayed quiet, sipping from a paper cup, occasionally whispering to Ziva, who nodded too enthusiastically for my liking. After lunch, I gathered everyone into the living room. "I want to share something," I said, reaching for the remote. The room dimmed slightly as I hit play on the TV. It wasn't a long video, just a slideshow. Images, short clips, grainy footage of me boarding buses in the snow, screenshots of spreadsheets tracking every cent, a photo of my bruised cheekbone from that night 2 years ago, a video clip of a coworker handing me a pay stub with a quiet thumbs up, the sound of rain on my apartment roof the night I signed the lease. Then came the final slide, white letters on a black screen. This house is built from work no one ever thanked. Silence followed. Thick, not awkward, just real. Someone near the back clapped once, softly. Others shuffled in place. No one looked at Vera. She broke the quiet, her voice brittle. Was that necessary? I turned to her, calm. Yes. Because your silence was louder than this. That sentence hung in the air like incense, curling into every corner of the room. It was the first time I'd ever spoken back in public. The first time I let the truth breathe out loud. Ziva stood up, brushing crumbs off her lap. You always had this chip on your shoulder, she said, more confused than cruel. No, I said, facing her fully now. You always had their belief. I had to build belief out of scraps. Ziva's face tightened. I didn't ask for that. And I didn't ask to be erased. But here we are. The room split then, not with noise but energy. Everyone felt it. Conversations started again, slowly, but the warmth had thinned. Some stayed longer. Some made excuses. Vera left first, dragging Astria behind her with the same stiff pride she carried into every space. Once they were gone, and the last guest had taken a brownie for the road, I stood by the window and watched their car pull away. I didn't feel triumphant. And I felt clear. I walked over to the TV, ejected the flash drive, and placed it in a drawer beside my utility bills and apartment lease. Then I locked it, not because it was dangerous, because it was sacred. The next morning, Vera's Facebook post wasn't a thank you. It was a warning shot. Sunday morning, I sat on the edge of my bed, scrolling through notifications with a half-empty mug of lukewarm coffee resting on my thigh. My thumb paused mid-swipe when I saw it, Vera's newest Facebook post, the one that told me everything I needed to know. Some people think buying a roof means they've built a home. Pride goeth before the fall. No names, of course. Vera was always too careful for that. But the timing, the phrasing, there was no mistaking who she meant. It wasn't just a post. It was confirmation. The final nail. The quiet declaration of war. I didn't comment. Didn't call. Didn't text. I just took a screenshot, filed it into a folder on my desktop labeled Truth Exhibit B, then went about making eggs I didn't feel like eating. A few days later, Ziva's face started appearing on every local feed. Some lifestyle magazine had done a spread on her upcoming wedding, photos of her laughing over tea, talking about her tight-knit family, and the incredible support system she'd always had. Vera shared it naturally with the caption, "Our shining star, always destined for greatness." Not a single word about my house, my milestone, my independence. She didn't just ignore me, I thought. She made sure to erase me, again. And like always, it was with a smile. Midweek, I got a text from Vera. Let's have tea, just us, talk things out. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. I'm not available. She responded within minutes. Ever since you got that house, you've changed. I read the text 3 times, then set the phone face down. That's the thing about boundaries. When people start calling them attitude problems, what they really mean is they miss your silence. They miss how easily you used to fold. That evening, I went over to Nadia's apartment. We sat on her balcony, chamomile tea in hand, the city humming below us. She didn't press. She never did. I'm not sad anymore, I said after a long stretch of quiet. I'm just done. Nadia gave a small nod. Sometimes the absence of pain isn't joy, it's healing. We toasted with our tea like it was champagne. I looked out at the skyline and whispered, that house isn't just mine, it's my line in the sand. The next week, I found a small gift bag sitting on my doorstep. Plain, no tag, no card. Inside was the same wooden photo frame I had carved for Vera years ago. The one she left behind at her birthday dinner. The one she'd never opened. It was still sealed. I didn't throw it away. I didn't open it either. I placed it in the back of my closet, between an old winter coat and a set of expired warranties, not ready to burn the bridge, but I wasn't walking across it again either. There was no note, no explanation. But it didn't matter. The message was in the gesture, familiar, Empty, too late. That night, I updated my blog. Sometimes they won't clap, I typed. Clap anyway. The post exploded. More shares, comments, and messages than I'd seen on anything else I'd written. But the next message I got wasn't a like, it was a warning. The office was quiet that morning, that rare sort of silence that settles before the day fully wakes up. I was reviewing my blog analytics, skimming over heat maps and scroll rates when my phone buzzed. It was her, Vera. I didn't hesitate. I answered. Her tone was clipped, sharp like a knife someone didn't bother to polish. So you think we owe you everything now, huh? I leaned back in my chair, my voice steady. No, I just stopped pretending I owe you my silence. She didn't skip a beat. Ziva's wedding costs are rising. You're stable now. Can you help? There it was. The real reason she called. Not concern. Not apology. Just calculation. I let the question sit there for a second too long before answering. No. Not anymore. I didn't yell. I didn't explain. I didn't give her the satisfaction of an emotional mess to clean up. She exhaled, heavy with drama. So you're not part of this family anymore? If family means financing your version of love, then no. There was a pause, one she likely meant to feel weighty. But to me, it felt like the silence before a door shuts. I paid the price already, I said. I'm not financing the fantasy. I ended the call. That evening, my cousin Daria sent me a screenshot of another post Vera had made. This time, the caption read, "It's hard to raise children in a world that teaches them to hate where they come from." The comments below dripped with passive aggression. I've seen this happen too often. It's heartbreaking. Kids today don't value sacrifice anymore. No names, of course not. Vera never named names when she cut deepest. She let the implication do the damage. I didn't respond. Nadia texted me minutes later, probably having seen the same post. Ignore it. Let them shout into their own void. I smiled for the first time all day. Later that week, I found myself remembering something I hadn't thought about in years. It came suddenly, standing in line for coffee at the vending machine at work. A flashback to the break room at my old job. I was unwrapping a foil-wrapped sandwich I'd made from scraps the night before. Mustard, a slice of ham, and white bread that had gone stale around the edges. A co-worker glanced over and snorted. Damn, that's poverty core. I'd smiled, like I always did. Laughed like it didn't sting. But standing there now, I thought, those meals built my mortgage. And that felt like the most honest sentence I'd said to myself in weeks. Later that night, I opened my online profile. Under About Me, I deleted the word survivor. I typed self-builder. I opened my HR portal and changed my emergency contact. For years, it had defaulted to Vera. I replaced her name with Nadia's, my friend, my constant. That's the thing no one tells you about healing. It has paperwork, forms, signatures, decisions that seem small but are monumental in the ways they signal, I am no longer yours to guilt. As I finished, I saw a message pop up from Ziva. It read, I'm sorry she keeps dragging you into this. You deserve more. I didn't reply, but for the first time, I didn't feel resentment. I felt distance. That night, I lit a candle in my living room, not for forgiveness, for closure. The porch had become my church. I sat there most mornings, mug in hand, letting steam drift into the air as the city stretched awake. It was quieter now, inside and out. Peace didn't look like absence. It looked like stillness. And that morning, stillness was golden. My phone lit up with a message from an old family friend, someone who always lingered too long on the edge of gossip and concern. Your mom's still hurt, you know. I stared at the screen for a full minute before placing the phone face down on the table beside my tea. I didn't respond. I didn't owe that conversation anything. There's a freedom, I whispered to myself, in no longer trying to convince people you were the one bleeding. Inside, the house reflected me. Not just in style, but in story. Quiet colors, solid furniture I'd assembled with my own hands, and shelves that didn't just hold books, they held proof. Paint swatches with numbers written in ballpoint pen, hardware receipts folded neatly in a drawer, a stain on the floor from where the water heater had burst, and I learned, alone, how to shut it off. No one had known when I signed the deed. No posts, no announcements. I didn't need witnesses. I just needed ownership. Some milestones don't need applause. They just need presence. I placed my favorite mug, chipped along the lip, but still whole, on a freshly installed shelf and smiled. It had been a gift from myself, from a time when the future felt like something only other people got to plan. That afternoon, a text from Ziva appeared. "Bridal shower next month. Hope you'll come." I stared at it longer than I expected. It wasn't anger that made me decline. It was clarity. "Thank you," I typed, "but I'll have to pass." Years ago, I had once said no to a good man. Not because he was unkind, not because I didn't care, but because I wasn't ready to share something that didn't feel whole. My life then had been a puzzle missing too many pieces. Now, I wasn't declining from pain. I was choosing solitude. And that choice was no longer laced with shame. Saturday came, and with it, my ritual stroll through the farmer's market. Nadia walked beside me, sipping a lavender latte and commenting on how overpriced the artisanal cheese had gotten. "You didn't get closure," she said suddenly, glancing at me. "You built it." I stopped for a beat. "You don't need to rebuild a bridge just to prove you could have walked it again," I replied. That line hung between us like an unspoken agreement. We continued walking, a breeze picking up the hem of my jacket as we passed the fresh flowers stand. Back home, I found a mailer tucked into the stack near the door. "First-time homeowners appreciation event," it read. "Free giveaways, networking, champagne." I tossed it into the recycling without opening it. I didn't need validation anymore. That kind of approval had always been transactional, and I wasn't buying. Instead, I opened my journal and flipped to the last filled page. Beneath the list of utilities and a scribbled dinner recipe, I wrote, "I'm not healing to be lovable. I'm healing to feel light." The sentence didn't need to be profound. It needed to be true. That evening, I pulled out the photo frame, the one Vera had once left unopened, returned without a word. I wiped the dust from its corners and set it on the bookshelf. Not in the center, off to the side. It didn't deserve the spotlight, but it had earned a place in the story, not out of forgiveness, out of release. And then, a letter arrived. Not from her, but from someone I thought had already let me go. I came home from work just as the sun was dipping behind the rooftops, leaving a bruised orange trail across my living room floor. My feet ached, but something caught my eye near the door. An envelope, plain white, slid halfway under the mat. I bent to pick it up, expecting another flyer or neighborhood notice. But the handwriting stopped me cold. Astria. Not printed, not typed, handwritten. It took me a moment to process the name. My father rarely sent messages, let alone anything that looked this personal. The flap was sealed with precision. I opened it slowly, like peeling back time itself. Inside was a short note in his shaky cursive. "We failed you. When you stopped asking for less, we punished you for it." I stood by, thinking silence would keep peace. I see now, silence is what broke everything. This doesn't fix it, but maybe it's a start. Folded inside the note was a check, not for a large amount, not an apology bought in dollars, but a gesture. Enough to make a statement, not enough to buy forgiveness. I sat on the couch, the letter still in my lap. I didn't cry, I didn't smile. I just sat there, breathing in the quiet. Not all closure arrives in confrontation. Sometimes it comes in a confession. Quiet, late, honest. The next day, I scheduled a locksmith. He arrived just before noon, friendly but efficient, chatting about weather and pollen and how fast neighborhoods were changing. I nodded, only half listening, watching as he replaced the lock on my front door. When he handed me the new set of keys, I slipped the old one off my ring and dropped it into the trash without ceremony. No one who doubted me should hold access to what I built. The only keys they deserve are the ones they lost. That weekend, I opened my laptop to find that my most recent blog post, Inheritance of Silence, had gone viral. Again, hundreds of comments, some from strangers, some from names I hadn't heard in years. One line from a woman in Wisconsin stopped me cold. Your story gave me the courage to move out at 47. Thank you. I sat there staring at her words. They meant more than any family toast or forced holiday gathering ever had. That evening, I reached for something long ignored, the photo frame Vera had returned without a note. I opened it slowly. Inside was a picture of me and Ziva from when we were children, no older than 7, standing side by side in a field behind the house. We were covered in dirt and smiling like the world was still soft. I didn't cry. I didn't place it in the living room. I walked to my closet, set it on the top shelf, and let it sit with the rest of the things I no longer carried, but didn't need to throw away. Some memories aren't for display. They're for remembering where you came from, not what defines you. Later that night, Ziva sent a text. You were right. It wasn't fair. But thank you for not turning cold. My reply was short. I didn't become cold. I became clear. Then I opened my phone settings, tapped her name, and clicked block. No anger. Just peace. No fight left to finish. Just a silence I finally chose for myself. At dusk, I stepped into the backyard with a small potted tree. I dug the soil gently with my hands, felt the earth cool and damp beneath my fingers. As I placed the roots in and covered them, I whispered, grow wildly, even if they say the soil's not right. Back inside, I opened my blog and began to type the last line of this chapter. My chapter. I wasn't built from love. I was built from rejection. And still, I rose.